Grodzka Gate and Theatre Center. My name is Magdalena Dziaczkowska. I am a part of Education and Animation Lab. I work here, and I would like to invite you today to discover with me our center, to discover our mission, our goals, and to see our exhibition. We are starting here, and this is very important because in this very room happened a story that is very important for us and that changed forever our mission and, let's say, destiny of this place. Everything started in the beginning of the 90s when the NN Theatre received this building from the municipality for its seat. They chose this name, NN, which comes from Latin, nomen nestio, which means no name in English, because they were trying to do something else, something different, but they were not sure what exactly is the new thing. One day, an elder lady came here and she started conversation with people from the words, "I am the NN." And behind that, there was her personal story. She came to Lublin probably in 1942 from Lviv. She had no idea what is her real name, nor what was the name of his brother, and she didn't remember anything about her parents. She was around 3-4 years old when this happened, and in Lviv she was found by a Christian Polish lady from Lublin, and this lady brought her here to this place, exactly where we are standing today, because that was her apartment, basically. And when we discovered this story, that this girl from Lviv, Jewish girl, she was brought here and she spent almost entire war here hiding, it changed everything for people from NN Theatre. Before the war, Lublin was around 120,000 inhabitants. 1/3 of that were Jewish people. And what happened during the war, I guess you know. During the Holocaust, the major part of inhabitants, more than 99%, were gone. They perished. They were murdered in mainly in Grodzka camp, also in other smaller death camps. They were shot, and people who survived, it's approximately 200 people, so it's like 0.5%. It's not much. And what happened after the war was that during the communist era, the memory of these people, of Jewish Lublin, was gone. Nobody wanted to remember about it. And after almost 50 years of this oblivion, here in the NN Theatre, people started to be again interested. They started to dig, they started to look for the information about this past. And behind me, you can see boxes, black boxes. In them, you can find some stories from this Jewish Lublin, pre-war Lublin. This is a part of one of our projects that is called Oral History Program. We collect oral history testimonies, and right now we have approximately 6,000 of them. They are connected mainly to Jewish Lublin, pre-war Lublin. Also, we have some testimonies regarding the Holocaust itself, so the extermination of Jewish population of Lublin and surrounding towns, small towns, shtetls, and some other testimonies concerning just after the war period, and also communist era and the solidarity movement, etc. So it originated from this desire to discover Jewish past but in consequence, we really received a huge spectrum of knowledge about not only Jewish past of Lublin. Behind me, you can see a picture of Jewish district that later became a ghetto. And I would like to point you where we are right now, where is the gate, and where were the most important places of this Jewish town. So the gate is here, this building, and it was called, starting from 19th century, also Jewish Gate, because it separates the Christian town from the Jewish town, so the entire district that is behind me. Here you can see the castle. That is what's interesting in the middle of this Jewish district. In the front of the castle you can see Szeroka Street, this long street, and on the other side of the castle you can see this big building on a plan of a square, and this is the Great Synagogue. It was here starting from 16th century. It was built in the 16th century, but then it was destroyed a couple of times by the fires. So in this form it was built in 19th century. And these are the most significant points of Jewish town of Lublin. Now we are outside the gate. You can see the gate behind me, and behind the gate the former Christian town, so today the old city. Outside the gate there is a space that covers the area that was before the war, before the Holocaust, Jewish district, Jewish town. You can see for sure a lantern shining even if it's daytime. This is so-called lamp of memory that we put there to commemorate Jewish town. Jewish town was everywhere around me, everywhere behind me. I would be standing, if it was 70 years ago, on Zamkowa Street. And here you had some other streets that you may know, Krawiecka, Podzamcze, and other smaller streets that were extremely poor, usually this part of the city. And the main language spoken here was Yiddish. You could spend your entire life here without hearing a word in Polish. Now behind me you can see Castle Square. Castle Square is exactly in the place where before the war there was Szeroka Street, so the heart of Jewish town, the heart of Jewish district. After the Holocaust, Nazis decided to level the area of Jewish district, including Szeroka Street. After the war it was rebuilt, and communist authorities decided to build it in completely different way that doesn't correspond in any way to the pre-war layout of the streets. All the buildings, they are actually made in the 50s, built in the 50s, and they cover the pre-war streets of Cyrulicza and Furmańska. These are the only streets from pre-war time that are actually still in the form, historical form, the form that they were built before the war in 19th century. Now we are exactly in the place of Szeroka Street. So imagine this square full of houses, full of kneeler shops, full of people, carriages. That was how it looked like before the war in 19th century, in the beginning of 20th century, and in 18th century. Starting from 16th century, that was the heart of Jewish district. Now we are in the spiritual center of Szeroka Street. In the late 18th and the beginning of 19th century, a famous Hasidic rabbi, Yaakov Yitzhak Horowitz, lived in a house that was situated exactly where now you can see the statue of a lion. He was famous for his attempts to make the Messiah come as soon as possible. And he believed that Napoleonic wars are sort of wars of Gog and Magog, and that they are making the Messiah come very, very soon. We are now in a religious center of Lublin. This street that was here for ages before the war until 1943, it was Jateczna Street, which means Butcher's Street. And that was exactly the point where the first Jewish settlement in Lublin was established. And here, exactly behind my back, you can see 3 plaques, commemorative plaques that are commemorating the great synagogue of Lublin that was built here. It was built in 16th century and was standing here until the liquidation of the ghetto. After the liquidation of the ghetto, it was destroyed by Nazis. What is interesting is that to this synagogue was attached a very important academic facility that was Talmudic Academy. Tradition of Talmudic studies in Lublin was very, very deeply rooted. It started in 16th century, so in the golden age of Jewish community in Lublin, and it started with the arrival to Lublin, Shalom Shachna. He was a very famous rabbi, very famous teacher of Talmud, and he brought to Lublin the method of pilpul. After him, another very, very famous rabbi, Shlomo Luria, was teaching here, and these 2 rabbis were founders and initiators of the Talmudic studies movement in Lublin. Because of that, also later, approximately 400 years later, already in 20th century, the Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin was established, and you're going to see Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin later. Besides the synagogue, on Jateczna there was also a printing house, Jewish printing house, and that is very, very interesting because it was the first printing house ever created in Lublin. The Jewish printing house was established approximately 70 years before the first Polish printing press appeared in Lublin. Why here? As you can imagine, students of Talmudic studies needed books. So the printing house was providing books and materials for them. Books from Lublin were very well known everywhere in Europe. Those that were particularly important and valuable were, for example, the Babylonian edition of Talmud and the Book of Zohar. Behind me you can see intersection of 2 busy streets. Also in pre-war Lublin, somewhere here 2 streets, Jateczna and Krawiecka, intersected, and somewhere here at the intersection of these 2 streets there was a house of famous Yiddish poet Yankev Gladstein. He was born in Lublin, he was raised in Lublin, and in 1914, as a young man, he emigrated to US. When Gladstein came back to Lublin in the 30s, he was very touched by his home city, and all the memories of his childhood and youth came back to him. So after coming back to America, he wrote 2 autobiographical novels, one titled When Yash Set Out and another one, Homecoming at Twilight. These books contain very personal depiction of Yiddish Jewish culture in Lublin and, to be honest, in the entire eastern part of Europe. We are now in the old Jewish cemetery, and this cemetery was active actually from the very beginning of life of Jewish community in Lublin. So from the 16th century, the eldest tombstone found here, still preserved, is from 1541, and also all eminent rabbis of Lublin were buried here. Behind me you can see the Ohel of Jakub Itzhak Horowitz, the seer of Lublin, that you already met. And if you would approach to this Ohel, you would find hundreds of kvitele, so little supplications, praying for the intercession of the seer. The Ohel of Jakub Itzhak Horowitz is in the direct proximity of the tombstone of Shalom Shachna, so the founder of the first yeshiva ever to be constructed in Lublin. Also, Shlomo Luria, so the one who founded the great synagogue, is buried on this cemetery. We are now at former Czwartek Street, and behind me you can see a Jewish culture center named after Yitzhak Leibush Peretz. It was supposed to be open on September 1st, 1939, and as you can imagine, it never was. After the war, starting from the liberation of Lublin in July 1944, when the first Holocaust survivors were coming back to Lublin, they started to gather in this point, in the Jewish Culture Center, and that was the first place to go to receive some help, some information about other survivors. So it was a very, very important point on the map of post-war Lublin. We finally arrived to this very, very significant point on the map of Jewish Lublin. This is Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. First boarding yeshiva ever that was established and opened in 1930 by Rabbi Meir Shapira, who created this completely innovative way of studying Talmud. They had their own synagogue inside at first floor. It is restored to the Jewish community right now and is still active as a synagogue. Both the opening of the yeshiva and the death of famous Rabbi Shapiro were events that attracted thousands of Jewish people, especially those more religious, to Lublin. And huge demonstrations followed these events. When the yeshiva was closed in September 1939, Nazis used this building for their own purposes, and they destroyed some of the objects that were inside, among them a beautiful model of Second Temple in Jerusalem and the library that contained more than 12,000 of scrolls and books. They were probably all burned in this yard. This might be a very interesting point for some of you who read Isaac Bashevis Singer novels. This is Probostwo Street, where probably was the hermitage of Jascha Mazur, the magician from Lublin. Another important point of Lubartowska Street, number 24, here was born and raised a famous writer, Anna Langfuss, née Sternfinkel. After the war, she emigrated to France, and in France, she won one of major literary awards, Goncourt Prix. What was very innovative in her writings was that she decided to use her Holocaust survivor experience and actually create on the base of it an action of a novel. One of the most important novels she wrote was Bagage de Sable, so the baggages made of sand. We are now on Kowalska Street. Kowalska, so blacksmith, street of blacksmiths. That was one of the streets with lots of craftsmanship, shops, vibrant with Jewish and Gentile life. That was very important point of Jewish map of Lublin during the Second World War, because that was one of the borders of the ghetto. One of the borders was Lubartowska Street, that you already see with the yeshiva and other places. And exactly at the intersection of Lubartowska and Kowalska Street, there was a main gate to the ghetto. We are now in the place of first post-war Jewish committee, first post-war Jewish authority. It was established here in Lublin because these lands were liberated in the beginning, already in July 44, by Soviet Army, Red Army. Here was established first Jewish committee that later became Central Jewish Committee for all Jews in Poland after the Second World War. So, in fact, for all Holocaust survivors. Why is it important? First of all, it's very important for us because it is here where people started to give their personal survivor testimonies. The first Holocaust survivor testimony ever was written down here in this building in Lublin. And that started the whole process of documentation and collection of documents regarding the German Nazi crimes against Jewish people. This is the last element of the part, our exhibition that is dedicated to Jewish life in pre-war Lublin. This model shows basically the area that was inhabited mainly by Jewish people before the Second World War, and this is the situation just before the outbreak of the Second World War. In this area, even if a major part of inhabitants was Jewish, not only Jews lived. There were also Catholic and Orthodox churches, and as you can imagine, also some Polish people lived in this area before Second World War. Then, in 1941, a part of this area, significant part, became a ghetto that was liquidated in March 1942. The life part of this exhibition finishes with the model of non-existent Jewish town, and there is one person who will introduce us to the part of the exhibition that is dedicated to the Holocaust, to the extermination, and this person is Henryk Żdomirski, a boy who was born and raised in Lublin before the war. He was born in 1933. We know exactly where did he live, and we know his story from his cousins, his relatives in Israel. We received entire documentation, his photographs, also some letters between his father and his uncle. And for us, it's a very, very important figure because it makes people think not only about numbers. When we say that 42,000 people from Lublin were murdered during the Holocaust, it's not really relevant to what happened because it's not only about numbers, it's about individual stories. And Henio's story is an example that helps us to illustrate how important is the death of every single person. Here you can see photographs of Henio since the very beginning. Henio is 1 year old with his father. Then you have photographs of Henio with members of his family. The last photo of Henyo that we have was taken in July 1939. We know exactly where this photo was taken, and every year on that place we organize a special commemorative action, and this photo is also the one that will introduce us to the part of exhibition that is dedicated to the Shoah, to extermination. History of Henyo became for us an inspiration for creation of innovative workshops using the method of creative writing. During these workshops, young people, adults if they want, write letters to Henyo, because we know two of his addresses, before the ghetto and in the ghetto, and then they put letters in envelopes and they send it by mail. After a week or 2 weeks, they got back their letters with the annotation, the address is unknown. For us, this is a very creative way to make people think about Holocaust through the story of one life, not only through numbers. This part of our exhibition is dedicated to the extermination, to the Holocaust, and to the memory of victims. As an important part of Nazi policy towards Jewish people was making only numbers of them, erasing their identity, their names, for us it's extremely important to bring back the names to these people who died. This is why we show here a list of names. These people are people who were transferred from the main ghetto to the transitive ghetto. It's 4,500 of names, and for us it's extremely important because this is the only transportation list that we have today, and we know only the names of this over 40,000 people. The other victims remain unknown. To make visitors remember about the victims as real people with their stories, we present here also pictures from the ghetto taken by a German soldier in 1941.
Ashman Israel Wolf. Atlas Aaron Mordechai. Atlas Mayer. Atlas Baila. Aufman Pinchas Szyja. Aufman Shul Icek. Aufschlag Abram Szyja. Aufschlag Leizor Hersz. Aufschlag Małka. Aufschlag Moszek. Aufschlag Usher Hersz.
When Jews came to Poland, they found themselves in a wood. Do you know this legend? This is a legend that explains the Hebrew name for Poland, Polin. I'm sure you heard it already, and I would like only to add that this forest was very, very near from Lublin, and this is why we decided to use this symbol. The forest that Jews found themselves in and they decided to stay became a symbol of their life, thrive, and prosperity in Poland. We decided to use this symbol of a dead forest to show the emptiness, lack of life that remained in Poland after the Holocaust. In a symbolic way, we present here also a poem by Jakub Gladstein, a poet that you already met, a poem titled Dead Men Don't Praise Lord. In this poem there are very remarkable lines saying that on Mount Sinai, Jews accepted the Torah from God, and in Lublin, they gave it back. And as we mentioned, for Gladstein, Lublin is a symbol of entire Holocaust. After this black space, we found ourselves in the attic that is full of light, white. It is dedicated to the memory of the righteous among the nations from the Lublin region. And for us, they were like lights in the darkness. That is why we chose this part of the exhibition to be entirely in white, because we wanted to distinguish it from this dark part dedicated to the Holocaust. Around me in the boxes you can see some of the stories of the righteous and the stories of the survivors who were helped by them. Two groups of people were invited to participate in this event. On one hand, Jewish survivors, on another hand, Polish Christian righteous. The idea of this whole mystery of memory, as we call it, this event, was to show that this land has double identity, has Jewish identity and Christian Polish identity. And this is something that we remember during guiding tours, receiving tourists here, when we prepare all our activities. And this is the main idea of this center, that there is no such a thing as Jewish past of Poland, and there is no such a thing as Christian past of Poland. Our past is shared.